Alex Thompson was elbow-deep in a Humvee engine when three young soldiers burst into the motor pool, their laughter echoing off the concrete walls like gunshots. Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison led the pack, his chest puffed out with the kind of arrogance that came from 2 years of soft garrison duty and 0 real combat experience. "Hey, mechanic lady," Jake called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "Think you can actually fix that military vehicle? Or should we call someone who knows what they're doing?" Corporals Rick Coleman and Tommy Walsh snickered behind him, their eyes scanning Alex's grease-stained coveralls and oil-smudged face with barely concealed amusement. To them, she was just another civilian contractor, a 2-year-old woman who'd somehow landed a job in their world but would never truly belong. But in exactly 90 seconds, all three of these men would be frozen in absolute terror, their mouths hanging open, their assumptions shattered like glass against concrete. Because none of them knew that Alex Thompson had spent 12 years executing the world's most dangerous operations, had neutralized 47 enemy combatants with surgical precision, and had survived CIA Special Activities Division training that broke operatives half her age. What was about to unfold in that motor pool would rewrite everything these soldiers thought they knew about strength, about courage, and about the woman they'd dismissed as just another grease monkey. The emergency klaxon that was about to sound would strip away Alex Thompson's carefully constructed cover identity and reveal the operative beneath, an operative whose legend was whispered in the darkest corners of intelligence communities around the world. This is her story. And if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever had someone look right through you without seeing who you really are, then this story is also about you. Because sometimes the most dangerous people in the room are the ones nobody notices. Stay with me, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about hidden heroes. Alexandra "Alex" Thompson had perfected the art of invisibility. Every morning at 0530 hours, she'd arrive at Camp Pendleton's motor pool, punch her time card, and disappear into the maze of military vehicles that needed repair. Her coveralls were always a size too large, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her movements deliberately unhurried. She'd been playing this role for 18 months. The performance was flawless. The slightly confused look when someone mentioned military tactics, the way she'd defer to even the youngest Marines on matters of protocol. To everyone at Camp Pendleton, Alex Thompson was exactly what she appeared to be, a competent civilian mechanic. But legends couldn't erase muscle memory. The way Alex's eyes automatically tracked exit routes, the precision with which she maintained her tools, the perfect military corners she unconsciously made when folding her coveralls each night. Beneath her unassuming exterior lived one of the most lethal operatives the CIA had ever produced. Lieutenant Alexandra Thompson, her real rank, her real identity, had been officially dead for 18 months. Killed in action during a classified operation in Syria while she hunted the terrorist network that had nearly cost her everything. The motor pool assignment was strategic positioning, placing her exactly where she needed to monitor threats to one of the most important military installations on the West Coast. Staff Sergeant Morrison and his crew had no idea they were looking at a ghost. "Earth to mechanic lady," Jake Morrison's voice cut through Alex's thoughts like a rusty blade. He was standing directly in front of her workstation now, close enough that she could smell the energy drink on his breath and see the acne scars beneath his carefully groomed beard. "I asked you a question." Alex slowly emerged from beneath the Humvee's hood, wiping her hands on a shop rag. She'd learned to take her time with these interactions, to let the young soldiers feel important while she gathered intelligence on their personalities, their weaknesses. Information was always useful, even when dealing with glorified children playing dress-up. "Sorry, Sergeant," she said, deliberately mispronouncing his rank. "I was focused on the engine. What can I help you with?" Jake's eye twitched at the rank error, just as Alex had known it would. Men like Morrison lived for respect they hadn't earned, demanded deference they didn't deserve. In her previous life, she would have corrected his arrogance with extreme prejudice. Now, she simply filed away another data point. "It's Staff Sergeant Morrison," he corrected with exaggerated patience. "And what I want to know is whether you actually understand military vehicles, or if we need to bring in someone qualified." Corporal Coleman snorted with amusement. Come on, Jake. Look at her. She probably thinks a firing pin is something you use to hold up pictures. Tommy Walsh chimed in with the eagerness of someone desperate to impress his superiors. My dad says they shouldn't let civilians work on military equipment anyway. Security risk and all that. Alex nodded thoughtfully, as if considering their concerns for the first time. You know, you might have a point about the security angle, she said, her tone carefully neutral. I mean, I do have access to pretty much everything that comes through here. Vehicle specifications, maintenance schedules, operational readiness reports. She let the statement hang in the air, watching as the implications slowly dawned on the three men. Jake Morrison's confidence wavered slightly. Well, I'm sure you've been properly cleared, he backpedaled. I just meant, you know, in general. Of course, Alex agreed easily. Though I have to admit, some of this equipment is pretty impressive. Take this Humvee, for instance. She gestured to the vehicle she'd been working on. Fully armored, communications array, defensive systems. Makes you wonder where it's been, what it's seen. She was baiting them now, using their own egos against them. Young soldiers always wanted to sound knowledgeable. Rick Coleman took the bait immediately. Oh, that one's seen some action, he said with manufactured authority. Just came back from overseas deployment. Afghanistan, I think. Alex made a mental note. The vehicle's maintenance records would tell her exactly where it had been, who had used it, and what kind of operations it had supported. Wow, she said with practiced amazement. You guys must have some incredible stories. Jake Morrison puffed up like a peacock. Well, we can't talk about everything, of course. Operational security and all that. But yeah, we've seen our share of action. Alex knew for certain that none of these three had seen real combat. Their psychological profiles screamed garrison soldiers. All bluster and no substance, men who polished their boots obsessively because they'd never run through actual mud while bullets whistled overhead. But she played her part, nodding with wide-eyed admiration. That must be so dangerous, she said. I can't even imagine what that's like. Tommy Walsh leaned against her workbench, clearly enjoying the attention. The thing is, ma'am, you've got to be ready for anything. Enemy contact, IEDs, hostile civilians. Split-second decisions that can save lives or get people killed. Sounds terrifying, Alex murmured, suppressing the urge to laugh. But as the three soldiers continued their performance, Alex's attention was caught by something else. Through the motor pool's windows, she could see unusual activity on the base perimeter. Vehicles moving in patterns that didn't match standard patrol routes. Her internal threat assessment system began processing the anomalies. Wind direction and speed, sight lines and cover positions, location of weapons and potential defenses, exit routes and rally points. It was the kind of automatic threat evaluation that separated genuine warriors from weekend soldiers, and it was about to become very relevant. Because at that exact moment, the base's emergency alert system activated with a sound that would change everything. The klaxon's wail cut through the motor pool like a blade, its urgent tone freezing every conversation, every movement, every breath. Red warning lights began flashing in sequence along the ceiling, casting everything in intermittent crimson that made the massive space feel like the inside of a beating heart. All personnel to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Repeat. All personnel to emergency stations. Potential hostile activity detected on base perimeter. The announcement echoed off concrete walls with mechanical precision, but Alex heard something else beneath the words. A tension in the communications officer's voice that spoke of genuine threat, not routine exercise. Her body responded before her conscious mind had fully processed the implications, muscle memory from a dozen real emergencies overriding 18 months of carefully maintained civilian behavior. Staff Sergeant Morrison looked around wildly, his earlier bravado evaporating. What the hell? We weren't scheduled for any exercises today. Corporal Coleman had gone pale, his hands trembling as he reached for his radio. Should we call this in? Tommy Walsh was backing toward the entrance, his eyes wide with panic. Maybe we should get our weapons. Alex remained perfectly still, her senses extending beyond the motor pool's walls. Through the emergency klaxon, she could hear other sounds: helicopter rotors, heavy vehicles moving at speed, orders being shouted across the base. Her trained ear identified at least 3 different types of aircraft, too many for a standard drill. Attention all personnel. Security condition red is now in effect. Unknown hostiles have breached the outer perimeter. All non-essential personnel report to designated safe areas immediately. Morrison's radio crackled to life with overlapping voices, a chaos of situation reports, and confused questions from junior personnel throughout the base. Alex listened to the chatter with focused intensity, extracting actionable intelligence from battlefield communications. Possible multiple breaches. Better. Communications jamming detected. Need QRF to Sector 7. The pattern was troubling. This wasn't a coordinated exercise. Someone had penetrated Camp Pendleton's security with enough sophistication to jam communications and enough numbers to trigger responses from multiple sectors. Jake Morrison was struggling to maintain leadership, his voice cracking. "Okay, let's not panic. We follow standard procedures. Alex, you need to get to the civilian shelter immediately." "Where is that?" Alex asked, though she knew the base layout better than any of them. "Building 447, Rick Coleman answered. "Follow the yellow signs. Civilians aren't supposed to be in operational areas during alerts." Alex nodded obediently, but made no move toward the exit. Instead, she studied the 3 men. In all her months of observation, she'd never seen them face genuine pressure. Morrison's manufactured confidence replaced by uncertainty, Coleman's arrogance dissolving into nervous energy, Walsh's eagerness transformed into barely controlled fear. Emergency alert. Hostile forces have been identified as heavily armed and potentially coordinated. All personnel prepare for possible direct engagement. The latest announcement hit the motor pool like a physical blow. Walsh actually staggered backward, his face draining of color completely. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "This is really happening." Morrison was frantically trying to reach his commanding officer on the radio, but getting only static. Come on," he muttered, adjusting frequencies with increasingly desperate movements. Alex watched their panic with clinical detachment. Fear was natural. Even seasoned combat veterans felt fear. But these 3 weren't managing their fear, weren't channeling it into effective action. They were being paralyzed by it, rendered useless when their training should have taken over. It was then that her concealed radio, encrypted and operating on frequencies that officially didn't exist, vibrated with an incoming message. She checked the display with movements too quick for the distracted soldiers to notice. The message was brief, coded, and terrifying. "Phoenix asset activate immediately. Sleeper cell compromised. Primary target weapons depot. Authorization. Tango 7. 7. Alex felt ice water flow through her veins. The authorization code was legitimate, verified through channels so classified that only a handful of people knew they existed. And the message confirmed her worst fear. The attack wasn't random terrorism. It was a carefully planned operation targeting one of the most sensitive military installations in the United States. The weapons depot housed enough ordnance to level half of San Diego if it fell into the wrong hands. Phoenix asset activate. That was her. Lieutenant Alexandra Thompson, callsign Phoenix, officially dead but very much alive and apparently the only operational asset in position to respond. 18 months of cover identity evaporated instantly. The mechanic named Alex Thompson ceased to exist. What remained was a weapon, a human weapon forged in special operations training and tempered by years of combat experience these young soldiers couldn't imagine. Something in her tone made all 3 men stop and turn toward her. The change in her demeanor was so complete, so sudden, that it took them several seconds to process what they were seeing. "My name is Lieutenant Alexandra Thompson, Central Intelligence Agency, Special Activities Division. For the past 18 months, I've been operating under deep cover as part of a classified counterterrorism operation. That operation has just been activated. Jake Morrison blinked stupidly. What? Alex, this isn't the time for jokes. Alex reached into her coveralls and withdrew her concealed radio, then her backup sidearm, a military-issue Sig Sauer P-226. The weapon appeared in her hand, with the fluid motion of someone who'd drawn it 1,000 times before. This base is under attack by a sophisticated terrorist cell that's been planning this operation for months. She continued, her voice now carrying the absolute authority of command. They're targeting the weapons depot, and they've been feeding information to unknown assets for weeks. Rick Coleman's mouth was hanging open. But you're just a mechanic. Alex ejected the pistol's magazine, checked the ammunition count, and slammed it back home with professional efficiency. The mechanic was cover, deep cover. And right now, I'm the only thing standing between those weapons and the people who want to use them against American civilians. His hands shook as he examined the military ID. The photograph was unmistakably her, but everything else, rank, unit assignment, security classification, described someone who shouldn't exist. CIA Special Activities Division? He read aloud, his voice barely audible. Officially, you're correct, Alex interrupted. Officially, Lieutenant Thompson died in Syria 16 months ago. Unofficially, she's been sitting in your motor pool for the last year and a half, waiting for exactly this moment. The emergency klaxon continued its urgent wailing, but now it was joined by new sounds. The distinctive crack of gunfire in the distance, the rumble of heavy vehicles moving at combat speed, and underneath it all, the low thrum of helicopter rotors that seemed to be getting closer. Alex's real radio crackled with an update. Phoenix. Hostile force, estimated at 12 to 15 individuals, heavily armed Missouri Ving toward Sector 5. You are weapons-free. Repeat. Weapons-free. She keyed the radio with movements that spoke of absolute familiarity. Phoenix copies, moving to intercept. ETA. 4 minutes. She was already moving toward a concealed weapons locker hidden behind a panel that looked like standard motor pool equipment storage. Inside were items that definitely hadn't come from any civilian contractor's toolkit. Tactical gear, advanced communications equipment, and weapons that belonged in intelligence agency armories. CIA Special Activities Division officially doesn't exist, she confirmed, strapping on body armor with practiced efficiency. And officially, there are no female operatives in direct action units. But the people shooting at us right now don't care about official policy. She pulled on tactical gloves, checked her gear loadout, and performed weapons checks with the kind of speed that came from muscle memory drilled through thousands of hours of training. The transformation was complete. 18 months of careful performance stripped away to reveal the operative beneath. Here's what's going to happen, she announced, her voice carrying the absolute authority of command. You three are going to follow emergency protocols and get yourselves to safety. I'm going to handle the immediate threat. Rick Coleman finally found his voice. Handle it? By yourself? Against terrorists? Alex looked at him with something that might have been pity. Corporal, I've spent the last 12 years handling threats you can't even imagine. This is just Tuesday for me. The sound of gunfire was getting closer now, punctuated by explosions that rattled the motor pool's windows. Somewhere in the distance, someone was screaming orders in Arabic, confirmation that this was indeed the terrorist cell she'd been tracking. Phoenix, be advised. Hostiles are equipped with military-grade weapons and possible explosives. Threat level is maximum. Alex keyed her radio. Copy. Phoenix is moving to engagement zone. Recommend immediate evacuation of all non-essential personnel from weapons depot vicinity. She turned back to the three stunned soldiers. This conversation never happened. You never saw any of this equipment. You never heard any of these radio transmissions. And as far as you know, Alex Thompson, the mechanic, disappeared during the emergency evacuation. Tommy Walsh was shaking his head in bewilderment. But who are you really? What's your real story? Alex paused at the motor pool's rear entrance, her hand on the door handle. For just a moment, the mask of operational necessity slipped, and they could see something deeper. Weariness, perhaps, or the weight of secrets carried too long. "My real story?" she said quietly. "My real story is classified so far above your pay grade that even thinking about it could end your careers. But I'll tell you this much. For the last 18 months, I've been protecting this base and everyone on it. Today, that protection goes from passive to very, very active." The door opened to reveal chaos. Smoke rising from multiple locations, the flash of muzzle fire in the distance, and the sound of combat that was getting closer by the minute. "Stay safe," Alex said, and then she was gone, vanishing into the battlefield with the fluid grace of someone returning to their natural element. What happened next would become legend among the intelligence community, though the official reports would be heavily redacted. Morrison, Coleman, and Walsh watched Alex Thompson, Phoenix, move across the battlefield with lethal precision. The first contact came at the base's communication array, where 3 terrorists had positioned themselves to maintain their jamming operation. Alex approached using a drainage culvert that ran beneath the facility, a route she'd memorized during her 18 months of reconnaissance. Her movements were calculated and methodical. She engaged the first target with a suppressed shot to the chest from 200 meters, using the M4 carbine she'd retrieved from her concealed cache. The second terrorist turned toward the muzzle flash's approximate location, but Alex had already displaced to a flanking position behind a concrete barrier. Her second shot took him center mass before he could acquire her new position. The third terrorist, now aware he was under attack, attempted to call for backup while seeking cover behind the communication equipment. Alex used a fragmentary grenade, rolled precisely to bounce off the equipment housing, to flush him from cover. When he moved to escape the blast radius, her third shot ended the engagement. But Alex wasn't done. Her radio intercepts had identified the main assault team's position. 7 heavily armed terrorists were advancing on the weapons depot through a route that bypassed most defensive positions. They'd clearly had inside information about security protocols. Jake Morrison found himself narrating what he was seeing. "She's moving to cut them off, but it's 7 against 1. Look at how she's moving," Rick Coleman interrupted. "It's like she knows exactly where everyone is before she even gets there." Alex reached the weapons depot's outer perimeter just as the terrorist assault team arrived from the opposite direction. She had positioned herself in an elevated position atop a maintenance building, giving her both concealment and a tactical advantage. The firefight began when the lead terrorist triggered a motion sensor Alex had anticipated. She engaged immediately with precision fire, taking down the point man with a headshot that dropped him instantly. The remaining 6 terrorists sought cover behind concrete barriers and began returning fire. This was where Alex encountered her first real challenge. One of the terrorists was carrying an RPG launcher, and his first shot impacted the edge of her position, showering her with concrete debris that opened a gash across her left temple. Blood ran down her face as she rolled away from the impact zone. "Jesus Christ," Tommy Walsh whispered. "She's bleeding. She's actually human." But the wound only seemed to sharpen Alex's focus. She used smoke grenades to obscure the terrorists' vision while she repositioned to their flank. Moving through the facility's maintenance tunnels, routes she'd studied extensively during her cover assignment, she emerged behind their defensive line. The next 60 seconds were a masterclass in close-quarters combat. Alex used the depot's layout to her advantage, forcing the terrorists into a fatal funnel where their superior numbers became a liability. She engaged each target with deliberate precision, a double tap to the chest of the RPG operator, a headshot on the machine gunner who was suppressing the main gate. Tactical movement and firing that eliminated each threat systematically. The final terrorist attempted to detonate an explosive vest when he realized the situation was hopeless. Alex's last shot, fired while diving behind a concrete barrier, took him down before he could complete the detonation sequence. When the shooting stopped, 7 terrorist bodies lay scattered around the weapons depot. Alex emerged from cover, her face bloodied but her mission complete, already coordinating with base security to secure the area. Phoenix, base commander requests immediate debrief. Her radio crackled. Copy. Phoenix en route to command post. Be advised. This was a probing attack. Recommend increased security posture until we can assess potential follow-up operations. Jake Morrison slowly sat down. A probing attack? You mean this wasn't the main event? Alex's voice came through clearly as she coordinated with arriving security teams. Her tactical assessment demonstrated knowledge far beyond anything a civilian contractor should possess. Site is secure, but we need full intelligence exploitation. These individuals were too well informed about our defensive positions. Recommend immediate security review for potential inside assets. As emergency vehicles arrived and the crisis transitioned into investigation, the three soldiers found themselves grappling with a reality that challenged everything they thought they knew about military service, about combat, and about the woman who'd been working beside them for 18 months. We mocked her, Rick Coleman said quietly. For 18 months, we treated her like she was some kind of joke. Tommy Walsh was shaking his head in amazement. And she never said anything. Never corrected us, never even hinted at who she really was. Jake Morrison was still staring at Alex's military identification, trying to reconcile the professional warrior they'd just witnessed with the quiet mechanic who'd endured their condescension without complaint. Staff Sergeant Morrison? Alex's voice came from directly behind them, causing all three to jump. She'd returned to the motor pool without any of them noticing, another demonstration of skills they were only beginning to understand. She was still in full tactical gear, her weapons secured but ready, her demeanor completely professional. But there was something different in her eyes now. Not the hidden amusement of someone playing a role, but the direct gaze of someone who no longer needed to pretend. "Ma'am," Morrison said, coming to attention with more genuine respect than he'd ever shown anyone. "I mean, Lieutenant, I don't know what to call you." "Alex is fine," she said simply. "My cover identity is being terminated as of today, so there's no point in maintaining the fiction anymore." She moved through the motor pool, systematically destroying evidence of her concealed equipment caches and encrypted communications gear. The thoroughness of her operational security became apparent as she revealed hiding places and equipment caches that had been invisible for 18 months. "What happens now?" Coleman asked. Alex paused in her evidence destruction. "Now you forget everything you saw today. Official reports will indicate that the terrorist threat was neutralized by base security forces. My involvement remains classified." "But why?" Walsh pressed. "Why hide what you did? You saved lives. You stopped a terrorist attack." Alex looked at the three young soldiers with something that might have been fondness. Because the best operations are the ones that never officially happened. Because sometimes the most important victories are the ones that can't be celebrated. She finished securing her equipment and turned to face them one final time. "You asked me earlier who I really am. The truth is, I'm someone who's spent the last 12 years protecting people who will never know my name, stopping threats that will never make the news, and ensuring that soldiers like you can sleep safely in your barracks." The emergency klaxons had finally stopped, but the three soldiers would remember this day for the rest of their lives. The day they learned that heroes don't always look like heroes, and that the most dangerous people in the world are often the ones you never see coming. 3 hours later, the motor pool had returned to an illusion of normalcy. The emergency alert had been downgraded, the terrorist threat officially neutralized by base security forces, and life at Camp Pendleton was slowly returning to routine. But for Jake Morrison, Rick Coleman, and Tommy Walsh, nothing would ever be quite the same. Alex Thompson, the real Alex Thompson, Lieutenant CIA Special Activities Division, was gone. In her place stood a woman who looked identical but carried herself with the unmistakable bearing of an intelligence operative. The coveralls had been replaced by tactical gear bearing no identifying marks that told a story of service none of them could fully comprehend. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying the formal tone of official business, I wanted to speak with you before my reassignment becomes effective. Jake Morrison struggled to find his voice. Reassignment, ma'am? My mission here is complete. Tomorrow I'll be returning to active duty with my actual unit. She paused, studying their faces. Which means Alex Thompson, the mechanic, will officially cease to exist. Rick Coleman shook his head in wonderment. 18 months. 18 months you worked here, and we never suspected. That was the point, Alex replied. Deep cover operations require complete commitment to the role. Every day, every interaction, every response had to be consistent with the legend we'd created. Tommy Walsh found the courage to ask the question burning in all their minds. The legend? You mean your whole background was fake? Alex's expression softened slightly. The background was fabricated, yes, but the work was real. Every vehicle I repaired, every maintenance task I completed, that was genuine. The mechanical skills were part of my training, not part of the cover story. She gestured toward the Humvee she'd been working on when this all began. Military vehicles in combat zones need operators who understand both their mechanical systems and their tactical applications. A CIA operative who can't maintain her own equipment in the field is an operative who doesn't come home. The revelation added another layer to their growing understanding of exactly how extensively trained this woman was. Not just a warrior, not just a mechanic, but someone whose expertise spanned multiple critical skill sets. Ma'am, Jake Morrison said, his earlier arrogance completely replaced by genuine curiosity. Can you tell us anything about your real service, your actual missions? Alex was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant, as if accessing memories she'd kept carefully locked away. I can tell you that for the last 12 years, I've operated in places that don't officially exist, against enemies whose names you'll never hear, conducting missions that are too sensitive for public knowledge. She turned back to them with a slight smile. And I can tell you that today's operation, stopping that terrorist cell, wasn't even close to the most dangerous thing I've done this month. The casual way she delivered that statement sent chills down their spines. If single-handedly neutralizing 7 heavily armed terrorists wasn't particularly dangerous by her standards, what kind of operations had she been conducting? Tommy Walsh stepped forward. Ma'am, will we ever see you again? Alex paused at the motor pool entrance, considering the question. Probably not. But remember this. Every day, there are people like me working in places you'd never expect, protecting things you'll never know about. The next time you meet someone who seems ordinary, who doesn't fit your idea of what a warrior looks like, remember that appearances can be deceiving. She gave them one final salute, crisp, professional, and carrying the weight of 12 years of service they were only beginning to understand. Take care of yourselves, Marines. And remember, the most dangerous people in the world are often the ones nobody sees coming. Alex Thompson's story ended that day, but Lieutenant Alexandra Thompson's continued in classified operations around the world. The 3 young Marines never spoke publicly about what they'd witnessed, but they carried the lesson with them for the rest of their careers. Never underestimate anyone, because you never know who's been hiding in plain sight. 6 months later, Jake Morrison was promoted to gunnery sergeant and assigned to recruit training, where he made it his mission to teach young Marines about respect and the danger of assumptions. Rick Coleman requested transfer to special operations training, inspired by witnessing real professionalism in action. Tommy Walsh became a military intelligence specialist, understanding finally that the most important secrets are often hiding in the most obvious places. As for Alex Thompson, both versions of her, she became a legend whispered in special operations communities around the world. The mechanic who turned out to be a CIA operative. The woman who stopped a terrorist attack with nothing but skills the enemy never saw coming. The proof that heroes don't always look like heroes. This story raises questions we should all ask ourselves. Who have you dismissed without really seeing them? What assumptions do you make about people based on their appearance, their job, their quiet demeanor? How many heroes walk among us every day, unrecognized and unappreciated? If this story made you think differently about the people around you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment about a time when someone surprised you by being more than they appeared. And subscribe, because there are more hidden heroes out there, and their stories deserve to be told. Remember, the most extraordinary people often hide behind the most ordinary appearances. The question is, are you paying attention?